I had a near-death experience September 1993. I was just 3 years old. I suffocated due to contracting pertussis. I was in a playground. I climbed onto a ladder onto a slide, and my breath was just totally suffocated. There was nothing there. And my body and my brain really just were not functioning. I felt a large crack in my brain, and that's when everything opened up, as that good old saying goes, that my brain cracked open and God came in. Well, I mean, this literally happened to me, where my felt my brain crack open, and that's when everything opened up, and I just connected very euphoric, mystical near-death experience, um, where I encountered my own spirit guides, angels, was aware of, lifetimes that came before this. I was aware of premonitions of what I would be doing in my future. I saw tons of angels, soul family members, and beyond. So, uh, you know, it was a profound experience that certainly changed the trajectory of my life, but really just opened up what is always inside of me and was inside of everyone else that we sometimes have our blinders on and forget, in this human experience. But there's so many things to unravel and to discuss about it beyond just the narrative. But, it's been around 30 years where I've been able to ground the experience, make sense of it from a human part, but from a soul part, it resonated the moment that it unfolded. Shortly after I had my near-death experience, my father told me that I came up to him and I said, I'm just paraphrasing my words now, but I said, something happened when I was rushed from the ambulance to the hospital that day. One day it will make sense to you, you'll understand, but for now you won't. So I won't even, talk about it. And I really did not talk about this probably for around 2 decades until I first started to become public with it. It wasn't until I was gifted a book by a family member the book was called Embraced by the Light by an author named Betty Eadie, who was on the Oprah Winfrey show, who also had a near-death experience. And reading Betty's book was just like, it gave me the universality behind it, and also gave me the language that Dr. Raymond Moody, my friend, coined, into the term near-death experience, that this was a thing, that I wasn't just the only kid. And so that was a little deflating. Like, I was just like, wow, I'm not that special. Other people's have it. But also, it was very relieving to know that this was a thing. I wasn't just the only one, and there was a whole group of people that I was able to understand that had this type of phenomenon. And so, yeah, I was, sometimes it still is frustrating having to explain things that are very elementary or basic to my perspective, like, common questions like, oh my God, you were just 3 years old. Like, how do you remember this? How do you know this? Which we'll get into, or like people who just have no clue what you're talking about. But my job isn't to convert at this time or to force people to have. It's just to kind of give them information out there. And I think it's kind of like being a lawyer in a courtroom where you're giving certain evidence of eternity. I'm not trying to make a case. I'm just giving presented information. I think it's of each person to really subjectively decide if this is something that they really resonate with or believe in or not. And people have autonomy with that. And I know what I had was real, but it doesn't mean that the person that I talk to will necessarily believe that. And so I've overcome needing to shake people down and to force them to change their belief systems. People will unfold as they should. And if my story helps in that journey, great. If not, there's certainly a lot of other, stories and experiences that they could have to hopefully reference from, in their life to make a positive change. I love those questions because they really allow myself to ground the experience, to explain it. I'm certainly my own biggest skeptic in everything. And so the more of those kind of questions that I have, the more I could ground it and take different areas and just make it more solid in a way. But yeah, that is a big question that people have where, they'll say you're 3 years old and first of all, how do you remember it, and how is it possible for you to have this experience at 3 years old and for you to understand all these things? And what I'll say to most people will be, potentially thought provocative, but essentially, you are not what you think.
Yeah.
The body that you're in is not really you. The gender that you have is not really you. The age that you have is not really you. The job, the car, all these things are just experiences, but they're not the full totality of who you are. who we are at the end of the day is an infinite divine soul, divine spark that is timeless, that is ageless, that has an inner knowing of all these things, regardless of how maybe it forgets or how much amnesia it has in the human journey but being a kid though, yeah, most kids, from the age of 1 to maybe, 0 to like 5 or 6 have probably more understanding and more wisdom that they remember than most adults because, they have more recollection. They're coming from the other side. There's less amnesia that they oftentimes have. So I would even dispute that to say, hey, you're an adult. How do you remember that? Not that I'm a kid that I remember that. Most kids do remember this stuff. So interesting question, but it certainly allowed me to look at age in a much different way where there's an incongruency with soul age oftentimes and physical chronological age. But there's also a beautiful thing when the soul and the chronological age are in sync with each other. That, to me is a beautiful thing. The trauma is a great gift, and obviously there's a disassociative component that some people have with their own near-death experiences. Like I just interviewed someone on my channel named Stephanie Arnold who had a tremendous near-death experience where she was clinically dead for almost like over half a minute, and she discussed that she didn't even remember anything from a near-death experience. And then she went to someone like myself, like a regression therapist, and all of a sudden she was able to remember everything. So again, it takes time to process this, but yes, there is a traumatic component to it. But for me, it was clear recollection from the moment that it happened when I opened up my eyes in the hospital bed that I knew exactly what happened. The only difference was I was just 3 years old, and to this day, I don't have the language to describe it, and language can never really describe it. It's also just syllables and words. They can't summarize things that are above this reality. But it's the best tool
Yeah.
reference that I do have, and so we try to be as much of a wordsmith as we could.
Well, I think anything that happens before the age of 7 or 8 is meant to be. It's like part of your life plan. So clearly that was part of your life plan in any event.
No
So
question.
what did you learn from that? I mean, what is it that came out of that? Because there's a reason you got given that.
Yeah, no question. In Natasha, I haven't heard like enough near-death experiencers really discuss the why. They've discussed like the what, like what happened to them, but why did they feel specifically
Yeah,
that that experience happened to them? I mean, you're about 5 to 10% of the population. This is a major transformative life event. If you are a detective, like why do you feel are some of the possibilities as to why you
yeah,
would go through this as part of your soul plan? A fair question. Um, I can't say like definitively this is exactly why. But if I were to put my best detective hat on and something that really resonates the most, I certainly believe that from completion we begin. And other lifetimes that we live are related to this current lifetime in major themes. In my NDE, I had a life review of other past lives, which has been evidentially proven from different intuitives and mediums that have read for me prior to ever me becoming public at all with my story, that have been able to see and hear exactly what I saw and heard within my own past life recollection. But the last lifetime in which I completed suicide, I don't say commit because I don't criminalize suicide, much like I don't criminalize mental health at all, much like I wouldn't criminalize cancer, heart disease, or those nature. To me, they're
yeah,
synonymous. And so I did that, and I just remembered how there was nothing to hold on to. I just felt completely deprived of life force. My back was against the wall. There was no hope. And then, boom, I made that decision. It was all okay in the end, and I'm here obviously today. So I didn't, burn in eternal hell. I'm okay. Things were gone, and all is forgiven. Um, though some days may feel like that. Certainly in these challenging times, I'll be okay. I just understood that my near-death experience is very much correlated to that, where, once again in my NDE, I was suffocated from life. I was going through the most traumatic moment where I was just not over there, wasn't over here. I was in this incredible curative incubational trauma that felt like an eternity of hell. And once I just kind of like let go of that suffocation of letting go of my human breath, I surrendered to this breath of eternity was when everything opened up and I was in the womb of God again and I was home. And so for me, it just reminded me for myself on a personal basis within the practice that I use, just that exact power of surrender, which is certainly rooted in, a lot of recovery orientation and Alcoholics Anonymous, and a lot of the clients that I've worked with, but also in mental health. We have a phrase that says just kind of like ride the wave, and just kind of surrender to the moment and reminding ourselves that pain has an impermanence and all of life itself has impermanence. The only thing that is permanent is the love that we have and how we're able to really interpret, situations. And so it's just kind of like that sign behind you that life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass, it's about learning to dance in the rain, but just really understanding pain um, from a deeper level. And the ultimate pain that we could have on a deeper level is death that we see, which is we see it as an ultimate ending. And certainly my near-death experience reminded me there is no death. And if there is no death, there is no true pain from the broader perspective. It's just a temporary status, you know.
Well, that makes sense because, I mean, from my understanding is that your life, wherever you start is where you left off. So if you had some karmic something going on, you're going to come into this life, choose certain parents, choose certain life conditions so that you could learn from them. And if you didn't learn from them, then you're going to come back and start again. Does it feel like that for you, that you've had to come and relearn certain things that you didn't get a grasp on that? Or is it more having the closure of knowing that you connected?
Yeah, I certainly believe in the notion that messages are repeated until some of those lessons are embraced. And I think we're all traumatized by school to a certain degree. And so we say like life is a school, like people just could get turned off by that term. But I say life is a great opportunity, where we could expand and become every day in every way, a better version of ourselves. And so I think
Mm.
really certainly from taking each referenced experience that we have on our journey and being able to have some degree of a lesson behind it, leads to moving the needle of our own evolution and really becoming a grander version, of ourselves. And, so every day there might be triggers that we may have. We might have our very human moments. No one's kidding themselves. They don't have those things. But again, it's just to take a step back to just get objective about things and says, geez, how could I maybe look at this in maybe a different way with more compassion and more empathy and stuff like that. It certainly sounds really good when you talk about it, but when you try to apply it, that's a whole different
Yeah.
reality. All this stuff sounds great, but we're all challenged in our own personal lives, and especially now more than ever, everything going on. I thought, geez, 4 years ago was divisive, but on a global basis, I mean, I've never seen anything more, and certainly, being someone who's Jewish, like I'm feeling it 1,000 times more than the average person. And so I say it's just an opportunity to develop pathways of compassion, of empathy, and we may not have to agree on everything, but we could find that middle ground, if you could find compassion with even those that we disagree with. So that's what I'm about these days. But certainly now, right now, I've never been more tested in my life than, this
I'm
moment. And
sure.
it's a lot,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, I'm sure. Because that's, I think, ultimately what is going on. It's about stop with the segregation.
Right.
It doesn't matter what race, creed, color, age, background,
No,
socioeconomic status, who cares? We're just
no.
people.
And well, yeah, I mean, on a human level, um, it's very significant to take, and I'm a therapist, so I do this all the time, and it's easier said than done, but I think people have to learn how to be better therapists in life, where sometimes you take your own story and you're able to learn empathic listening. And maybe you may not agree with something, but you're able to just take yourself out of the picture and listen. Like everyone wants to talk and argue over each other, but how will we really get anywhere if we don't, maybe listen and find the common humanity in all? And that's my hope, is to lead with empathy and compassion. And some days I do that better than other days, and other days I'm like, damn, my human part is very real, and I have to work through that. And so, every day is a journey to really develop compassion and empathy, and to kind of overcome, some of the ego in that box and just the us versus them game that we could all fall trapped to, myself included. So,
Yeah, yeah. And I agree, listening is so important. The more I learned to listen, the more I realized I never listened.
Yeah, most people just hear on a surface level. They hear what they want to hear. Especially now today where, we have, not to get too political, but we have, cancel culture where we'll just kind of summarize a person with just this person is that. And so you'll
Yeah,
focus on that, but you'll forget all the other stuff that they may say that may be good points. But if you're just so focused on just labeling and boxing someone in that point, that person loses all credibility and you can't find any type of common ground. And so, we come to a point where you have to agree with someone on every single thing in order for you to listen to them, and so that's almost an impossible task, and that causes a lot of divisiveness. And I think if you burn it down to, we all have the same basic needs at the end of the day and same worries. Like we want to have a good number on the scale in the morning. We want to have good food. We want to, be able to pay the bank account. We want to be able to have intimate relationships. We want to be able to get along with people, to be liked, to be loved, to give love. And so at
yeah,
our phyla and our core, the common characteristics are very much there and real when you take away all of those just labels that cause us to disassociate ourselves with people. My book and my work and my own personal and
yeah.
professional work, which what does enlightenment means? It just means that we really are really tuned into that light within. We just have an awakened way, remember who we are.
Yep.
So what does that mean? Does that mean in darkened? Does that mean just remove myself from everything? That means no, I have a responsibility to be the bearer of my light and to understand that when I remember my light, I can remember that my light can make a difference and that my microcosm can affect the macrocosm. And so I could think globally by acting locally.
Yep.
And I think if each person were to be able to remember their light, to remember to turn it on, wow, what a brighter world that we have. I mean, sadly, there's just a lot of dark rooms out there, and people aren't able to connect to their light, or they might need to just rewire it a little bit. So if each person returned their light, we'd have a lot more darkness because there's a lot more of us, people who are of light than of them. They just have to really turn on to it, and that'll allow us to really overcome the powers that be that probably do want to divide us and, create wars, which are certainly profitable for the world leaders, but not for humanity.
And it's not sustainable.
No, I mean, you just look at our story. I mean, what does it lead to? Individually, collectively, we have to really know history. We have to look at stories, what works, what does not work. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And also, I think the more chaos there is outside of us, the more it forces you actually just to look inward. So there's an opportunity there. Is because you don't know where you're going to be. You don't know what's going to happen. If the world could get shut down again tomorrow,
mhm.
where are you at the time that it's being shut down? Where do you find yourself? And
Yeah, yeah. So
it's
true.
just an
I mean, my
awareness. Yeah.
yeah, my friend has a term for that. He like coached Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. He taught them mindfulness. He's a good friend of mine, but the term that he has for it is the eye of the hurricane. If you look at the hurricane his name is George Mumford. On the outside of it is a lot of chaos and turmoil, and certainly we're experiencing that. We experienced that 4 years ago in 2020, the pandemic. But again, the masters are able to really go towards the storm. Kind of like the buffalo. The animal, the buffalo, doesn't run away from the storm; it runs towards it. It understands the way out is through it. And so I think for us, it's like we have the storm. So don't get disconnected on the outside and just be plagued by the media news outlets. We have to really go inward as much as we can, so that we could really find that place of peace, that place of awareness, awakening, and understanding of how to really navigate these tumultuous times and go through it skillfully as much as we can. Yeah.
So your near-death experience, did it impact you? So you had an experience in that moment, but have you carried that throughout your life as well? That you're able to, because I've spoken to people that are able to read people's thoughts. They're able to see people's events that have happened in their lives just by talking to them. Are you able to do that as well, or do you have a different kind of connection?
Oh. I'll remember that the next time I hang out with my NDE colleagues. I hope no one reads my thoughts because you don't want to go. No, I'm just messing. But
Well, they
no,
do.
no, 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 no. The key is to have a good product at the end of the day. Who cares about your thoughts? As long as it's just the product and your behaviors. That's what matters the most. And what I'll say is this, Natasha. Yes, absolutely. You make a great point that there's a lot of after effects gifts of having a near-death experience. It certainly does change you. To me, it just brings a lot up to the surface. It's always that might have been buried during the experience, and certainly intuitive capabilities, uh, are really heightened for myself. So yeah, I mean, I certainly, definitely as a child was particularly very intuitive around the time of my NDE and subsequently. Um, it was more of a nuisance though than anything else. Like I didn't walk around saying, like right now, like psychic is like the sexiest thing in the world. Like everyone wants to be psychic and intuitive and all that. But as a kid, it was just very annoying. Like I would see things, hear things, and know things, and just want to live life. And I'd be like, geez, like stop it. Like, I just want to live life. But they would all like come to me and just be very annoying. And now I've learned to really embrace it and not just kind of like bury that beach ball under the water. I just recognize it's meant to be on the surface and I'm meant to really honor it. But yeah, a lot of times that does happen, and I just find when I get quiet, I don't try to force it. Again, that kind of thing will happen to me where something will happen, and I'll just know at some level that I just kind of saw that happening beforehand. Just
Hmm.
will come to me, be just like, my God, So I have a lot of premonitions that happen. And just kind of like there's this tune of our thought energy, but then there's just like this station of intuition, this other station that's happening at the same time. And the more that you kind of tune into it, the more that you can kind of read things and see things and hear things and know things, that come, and then they hit you at a certain level. And once they happen, you're like, geez, I saw that, heard that, I knew that. But most of us bury that away. We don't listen to it, as much.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that you're a light bearer. And I many years ago when I did my first past life regression, I came back knowing I'm a light bearer. And I'd never heard those terms before. That was way before anybody, I mean, this was in the 90s, way before anyone was talking about that. And it's like something you know. Do you think we all have that ability, or do we all have to die first? Access it. That
Yeah.
seems like a hardcore way to do it.
There's many paths of the mountain of light of enlightenment. Um, uh, Certainly, through our deepest bliss, we could, find, moments where we're just like, wow, there's just such a spectacular part of myself and such a reality that I'm a part of that I just remembered that is so beautiful. And the inverse too. I know many people who experience the darkest moments can experience that too. I mean, I certainly, like I said before, I do speak to a lot of grief groups and people who have had traumatic loss or just losses very near and dear to them. And from that loss, they find a degree of transformation or gain in their life, where all of a sudden they start to reevaluate death in a different way, something they really didn't think of before. And they start to really remember that same kind of thing by looking at death. They're able to really find eternity. So I think shake-up periods are very significant of the soul, where we're getting too comfortable sometimes. Life just kind of like shakes things up, and in the moment it's really difficult, but long term, we could all look back on those moments and find, a byproduct of potential growth if we're able to really go through about it, in the right way. And so, yeah, I mean, certainly by losing ourselves, we could find, more and find ourselves, no question. But I don't think you really need to die to live. You really need to reevaluate your life and to have a death of maybe what the reality of what you're holding on to find way for more new life to come into form. Most people are very stagnant. They just kind of exist. They don't really live, and they don't really evaluate how they look at things. And there's a lot of, the Walking Dead out there. And so I think to me, what is life? It's just kind of something that regenerates itself. It expands. It's expansive. It's fresh. It's new. And so I'll take like a waterfall where it's constantly recycling, or a stream of water, or just this stagnant body of water where there's no movement. To me, that's death. Like life is rejuvenating. It's something fresh. It's something new. And I think if more people were to take an approach where say like, geez, how could I look at life in a different way today? They're actually really living. They're expanding. They're
Yeah.
growing. It's fresh. It's new.
And you're right, because most people are just zombies. Get up, go to
A
work,
lot of stagnant being who just exist. Yeah.
complain about their boss, come home, complain about the
Yeah.
prices of living, watch TV, go to bed.
Yeah. There's a
Yeah,
lot of people that are doing what they don't like doing for the sake of doing what they don't like doing.
Yeah.
which does not make any kind of sense to me, you know? Yeah, so I think really we have to really find things that really we hold on to, that we live for. You know, even if we're drowning, we have to find that solid piece to hold on to and eventually really learn, you know, how to swim
Mm,
through the waves and stuff like that.
mm,
So, you know, people ask me, like, how do I find joy? How do I find, um, you know, enjoyment? And it's an interesting, you know, kind of thing. But I think people just need to find their own passion, really what makes them, you know, happy, what makes them find joy, you know, and yeah, that's what I'll say, you know.
yeah. Well, I mean, I remember as a child looking at the sunset or just watching nature and just feeling totally awe-inspired. And we forget that. We kind of lose touch with it. You get so caught up in life. And I think the joy never really goes away. It just gets covered up with all this stuff. And the
Mm,
joy is under it all. If you just let it go and say, well, do I really need to worry about doing work or checking my emails today? Why
mhm.
don't I just go sit outside and go and look at the stars and just be in that space, in that moment? Because the sky when I look outside, I see that same sky is what the Romans saw 2,000 years ago. Or
Yeah,
it's like it's fascinating to me, but we tend to forget, you just like live indoors, keep your doors closed, locked. But yeah,
wow.
it's a
It's
nice
so funny. Yeah, I made a post, and if you're familiar with the actor William Shatner, he went on like some like NASA spaceship kind of trial thing, and he went up in outer space, and he was able to look at all the stuff, and he's like, my God, my problems are so much smaller than the way that I see them, and who am I at the end of the day? You know, he's able to see things with
yeah,
such a broad expression, and it's funny you're saying that. Just this past week, I made a post where saying, you know, when you really are able to get in touch with the greater cosmos, you recognize how broad of a life and how broad of a reality that you're a part of, while also understanding how small and insignificant you are in your problems at the same time. So
yeah,
you're able to really broaden, you know, this we consciousness or this connectivity to a greater understanding, and it also hopefully could really allow people to understand that my day-to-day stuff in the grand scheme of things is really not all that. And I think it's really by remembering who you are and what you're connected to versus what just might be some temporary emotions that we have to go through in this life, you know,
yeah,
that really in the end is not significant. It's just kind of going through progressions of, you know, stuff.
yeah. Yeah, one of the questions I ask myself is, will I still feel this way in a year from now? Is this going to be a problem a year from now? And if it's not, I'm
Right.
like, you know what? I'm not going to worry about it. And
My
then 9 out
God.
of 10 times it just goes away. Yeah.
Ain't that the truth? And kind of like weather. I mean, some days we'll look at the clouds and they'll be very congested. It'll be pouring rain. And we'll feel like, oh my God, this moment's going to last forever. We look back on it, we just don't remember that day ever. It's like, when does that day ever come into our memory? It like just comes and go like a blip. And,
Yeah.
you know, life is like that too. It's just everything's temporary, everything's in flux. You know, we just have to remember that the impermanence of all of reality and the grand illusion that these things like, you know, matter in the end. They don't. They're just going through their own motions and it's just a temporary experience, no matter how bad of an experience you had. Like I remember when I was once a kid, you know, I was once a kid. I still, I guess, am a kid, but you know, there was like this. I'm not going to use bad language, but there was this principal who was, you know, who called up the whole entire school outside on a baseball field, and he was on this big megaphone, and he said, "Whoever is talking right now, I'm going to call them out and ask them to leave." So of course, I have a baseball mitt in my hand. He thinks I'm talking. He screams my name at the top of, you know, my lungs. It was just a very startling experience, and at the time I was very heavy set. I was overweight, so it's like very embarrassing. Where I had to have the ultimate walk of shame in front of the whole entire school, and everyone looked at me. In that moment, I just felt my spirit guides. I felt my angels, and I felt that same thing that you're saying. That like this moment is so temporary. Like it's nothing. And I just was like, this is one moment in time. I will never remember it by tomorrow. If someone wants to think of it, great. That's I'm not paying rent in their heads. And the principal met with me, and I was just like, I had this approach where I just could give two you know what's because I just knew it was just a temporary moment, and I would never think like twice about it after. And so that's
Yeah.
so true. We just remember the grand scheme of things. Everything's in flux, and we just have to kind of like let go of attachment towards those things and just entrust that all is well, was well, will be well in the grand scheme of things, no matter what we're faced with. So I hope
Yeah.
that viewers can remember that. He was looking for a reaction from me, and I was like, cool as a cucumber, and I just like he was like surprised. He thought I was like gonna yell at him, whatever. I was like, all right, why are we meeting? And I was like, whatever. It did. It was like I was surprised because normally, like, in that moment, and that's all about what the connected way is about. It's really going past the human experience and through it, and really allowing this higher reality to govern our life and to really be connected to a greater truth. And just
Yeah.
remember that everything is temporary and you're connected to this greater understanding. It allows you to go through those moments at times, with a lot less emotional, baggages to it.
Share a little bit about the two books you've written.
My two books are The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, Life After Breath. They're both with publishers in California, and they've both been endorsed by several New York Times bestsellers, including people like Dr. Rima Moody, Anita Morjani, Alison Dubois, to name a few, Suzanne Giesemann. So they're great books. They really are able to really, the reason why I wrote them is I just kind of got tired of people saying, well, you had this and I didn't have that, so I can't understand it. And so I think
Okay.
these books are a great way for people to really remember their eternity, to really understand that they don't have to die to really live. They don't have to die to get to heaven. And that part of heaven is within all of us. We all have a degree of, recollection of it. And I think that's why people are tuning into these channels. Is there's something that we're saying that is hitting quite a core, that is quite familiar with people. Otherwise, they wouldn't be tuning in. And so
Yeah.
I think, again, these books are just reflections of what people really know deep within, but they're different steps and they're different kind of like rungs up to the ladder. Hence the name, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, where I had my NDE on a ladder going up into a slide, and I know God works through a lot of allegory and humor as well too. Think of Jacob's ladder. We saw the ladder going up to the heaven where he was running from his brother Esau, the book of Genesis. But yeah, I mean, it's really understanding different ways to have that awakened mind, that higher mind in our everyday life, if that makes sense. And but yeah, it touches on areas of mental health. It touches on grief. It touches on a lot of very human things, while also tapping into the supernatural and lessons from my NDE that people could hopefully help them move the needle of their lives.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're not just someone talking about an NDE. You're working in the psychiatric field, you're counseling, you're
Right.
doing all these things. It's your life's work. And I mean, to get that just in a book, it's lifetimes of learnings you can just kind of shortcut.
Mhm.
So yeah, well done. Are there any other books in the pipeline, or is this like, I'm tired, I need a break?
No, it's funny you say that. My late agent, William Gladstone, Bill Gladstone, he also agented Eckhart Tolle, Neil Donald Walsh, and a couple other people. But he also agented the books, those books for dummies, something for dummies, those kind of books, where it's
Yeah,
like very practical ways to do almost anything. So that's the way that I see myself. Where, not to say that people are dumb, but I try to really bring it down to earth and try to make it as practical, what I like to call spirituality with practicality. And again, I'm an earth sign, I'm a Taurian in this lifetime. So on the most earth sign as they come. And I just try to really ground all this stuff as they can because, I like talk to some friends and people who go to these fancy schmancy, big lectures by these big new age teachers, and they have really nice voices and they say a lot of good things. And I asked them, like, what did you learn from it? They're like, I don't know. It's like cooking spinach. It's like this big bag of spinach that looks really good, but what's left at the end of the day? It's really fancy, it's really schmancy, but what does it lead to? And so my job is just to get it as practical and straightforward as I can, because I think that really sticks with the masses. A
yeah,
lot of people, they like to hear the beautiful voices and the complex terminology, but it gets way too heady. And for the masses, it doesn't lead to practical change. And that's the task at hand, where I want to try to create these things that could be seen as complex to be as simplistic as they could. Regarding my own writer journey, I hope I can. I'm only 33 years old, so to retire at 33 years old with both of my books, you know, I don't think that's right, and I think I'd be quite bored without writing more books. My goal would really to be an infusion of mental health and spirituality and how they could really work hand in hand. That would be an ideal book that I have. Certainly I do train professionals now to understand these different phenomenon that come into clients' life, and I run things called continuing educational, classes, for
Mm.
professionals, just for them to really understand NDEs, shared death experiences, out of body experiences, spiritual transformative experiences, and beyond, and to depathologize and destigmatize some of these things into really recognizing that some of these things are very real. Whereas back in the day, you just kind of wondered how many people went into inpatient facilities, were medicated up the gazoo. They're having these real experiences and they never really developed, their gifts and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And how many people could have been John Edwards of the world or George Andersons of the world if we just allowed them to validate their experiences and were able to really listen and help them develop. And so that's what I really try to do, is really to help people to develop understanding and information within their fields so that people could come up to us and maybe we could be those safeguards of their vulnerabilities and stuff like that.